Wastewater Support Committee meeting for Tuesday, January 8th, 2019 at 8:30 a.m.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to let you know that Water Superintendent Dan Pelletier called me yesterday afternoon, and he was here because he, presented suggestions on a contact card, which we'll be discussing later. But sad to say, he had a medical issue with a child, and so he even offered to call in, but I told him that was totally not necessary. So I went ahead and printed out the things that he had sent to me earlier, and I'll hand those out, and we can go from
over there.
So just so you'll know.
All right, that works. I know Chris Clark isn't going to be here till about 1:15, he said. So we have like 15 minutes.
Use it wisely.
Yeah. All right, the approval of the minutes, did everybody look at them?
We do public comment yet?
Oh, yeah, I did.
You did, okay.
But was there any, I said public comment and then.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed.
Oh, go ahead, maybe I did miss that.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Megan. I'm the
Hi.
director. I just wanted to update you guys. Next Tuesday, the 15th, the Board of Health is meeting in the evening, and we are discussing the fees for connection as well as the licensed utility installer. It's been advertised as a public hearing, so if anyone has comments, they're welcome to come. That hearing starts at 7 on the 15th. They'll also be
Is it here?
It's here. It's in the small hearing room here at Town Hall at 7 in the evening on the 15th. The other thing they're discussing is the process for reviewing extension requests. So they'll be talking about what kind of criteria they'll be looking for to review and approve extension requests for extensions to sewers. And then another topic is the same day in the morning, I'm going to the Realtors group over at the community center in the morning. There's going to be 45 to 50 realtors, and I've offered to give them a little frequently asked questions on what they can expect for real estate transfers over the next couple of years before sewers are available. So if they have a house that's for sale that's in phase 2, what the process is if something were to fail, or if there's a cesspool. Things have changed a little bit. So I wanted to be able to give them a personal, here's the process for waivers to upgrade, and be able to answer any questions they might have.
You said the morning one was going to be the same day.
Yes, they're both next Tuesday. Yes.
And what time's the one in the morning?
That's the regular weekly meeting of the realtors, and that's at 9.
9.
It's not really a public, the residents don't go to that, but
All right.
if there are any realtors.
That's part of what they call their house tour, the Harwich house tour. So after that meeting, I'll go out and look at the new listings, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
I presented to them, I don't know, 6 or 8 months ago or something. I think it's important when you do that to remind them, as realtors, it's their fiduciary responsibility as they're working with properties out in the phase 2 area, that they have an obligation to at least advise their potential sellers and buyers that the sewer is coming.
Right.
Because the last thing you want to do is sell someone a property, Title V passes, and then next year they suddenly get a bill for, whatever to hook up to the sewer.
Right.
They need to know that going in.
Okay.
That's all.
I'm planning on giving them the guidebook,
Yep.
the handbook, as well as the 2-page steps to hook up. I think that will give them a lot of information and answer a lot of their questions. The first question I've already received is, how much is this going to cost? So,
Yeah, well, and what you'll find is a follow-up, because it happened last time. You'll end up with realtors who either at the meeting or couldn't make the meeting, because some of them don't go to those meetings. We'll contact you and say, how do I get the information?
Sure.
So they'll
Yes.
be looking for it.
okay, great.
Sharon?
Oh, here.
Two things. Do you have any kind of a sense, Megan, of like how many homes put in new septic systems, like say in the last 3 to 5 years, or updated them, or I'm just trying to get a feel of who would be the people who are going to be asking you
Well, I do know that we haven't allowed any or required any upgrades in the last year, or possibly 2 years. I can look to see how many updates have been in the last 5 years. There have been some, maybe a dozen or two.
All right,
It's a
that's close
small
enough.
number.
Yeah, okay, that's good enough. And when you talk to the realtors, it's probably too far in advance, but maybe nothing is ever too far in advance. I don't even know if you even mentioned Phase 3 is right behind it. I mean, it's only it could possibly be just 6 years away, which when you're
Right.
buying homes, just to even mention it, is in the plan.
Yep, and the Board of Health has been aware of Phase 3 coming along too, so we've had some questions about cesspool systems that are being for sale in Phase 3, so it's timely.
Good, thank you.
You're welcome.
Megan, I have a question. Any new homes that are being built, because there's those ones along 39 that are being built. I had a question that a neighbor was looking at one. Where do we stand with sewers with that?
So there are 2 new subdivisions along Route 39, and both of them were approved by the board before this Phase 2 was in effect. And they both had an approved shared septic system with an alternative technology. Both have come back to the board over the last 3 months and requested that individual Title V systems be allowed to be put in, and then as soon as the sewer is available, to hook up within 45 days. So right now, those homes, there is a sewer main that goes down those new roads, and it's ready to connect to the street, Route 39, as soon as it's ready to be hooked up to. So both of those subdivisions will have individual Title V septic systems for the houses. The Bascom Hollow subdivision, which is on the north side of the fire station, their approval through the board was to only develop 4 lots until the sewer is available, to keep the nitrogen load at a certain amount. And then once the sewer is ready, then they can build out the entire 8-lot subdivision.
So this is kind of a technical question, more out of curiosity. So let's say these homes, I'm looking at the ones that are, I'm going to say, closer to where I live, the ones that are by the cemetery.
Arthur's Way.
Yes. So what happens with those if they're not sold right away, and the septic system, the sewer system starts to go through? Who's responsible for that? Is it going to be
Whoever owns it at the time, whether it's still the developer
all right,
or the new homeowner.
all right,
There's deed restrictions in place already for that, so something recorded at the Registry of Deeds, the current owner knows 45 days from availability they have to hook up, and they've designed it so it's easily disconnected and reconnected. They've already put in that sewer line.
all right.
And then if a new owner buys a lot or a house, they too would have to do the Registry of Deeds, sign, notarized, I understand that I have to hook up.
All right, all right. I had somebody that had asked me, and I said I had not a clue.
Yes, they're
All right.
prepared. Yeah.
Okay, all right.
All right.
Anyone else? All right, thank you. Okay, all right, Chris isn't here yet. I'm going to move, go ahead.
Minutes? You skipped them?
Oh, we were approving those, good, good. All right, minutes.
Madam Chair, I would like to propose that we accept the minutes as written.
Okay.
I second it.
Okay,
Those are December 27th?
yes,
Thank you.
all right.
Checking.
Any further comments?
All in favor?
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, I had some questions, and Chris isn't here, on this wastewater information center. Larry, do you know anything more whether that's being discussed?
I do not. I raised it and I'll follow up.
All right, all right. right, do we want to move on until he gets here and start the neighborhood liaisons?
I'm a little hesitant because his schedule is so tight and this isn't our normal day, you know, if we get, I mean, we'll do whatever you want, but if we get into one discussion and then, what do you say, 2 more minutes?
All right, we'll give him 2 more minutes, because he said 8:45, so,
Right,
I talked to him last night, he's certainly planning on being here.
yeah.
Right.
Yes,
it's a lengthy topic.
but it's been a especially busy time for him.
All right. Well, so you don't want to tackle the neighborhood liaisons. You want to do anything with the contact card?
Well, they go together.
They go together.
Yeah. Maybe the monthly updates, the BOS monthly updates? That's a
We
quickie.
could, all right. We could go down to number 7, the monthly updates, which I'm going to give on the 22nd. Is there anything in particular that anybody definitely wants brought up?
Actually, I'm jumping back to these, but one of the things I was going to suggest is that in discussions with Dan, he would very much like to have as many people in the Phase 2 on the robocall list. And the homeowners have to sign up for that and get permission, but it allows him to immediately contact people in a neighborhood via their phone number. And that might be something that advertising, I think people think that it's automatic, and it's not. They have to sign up and approve being on the robocall list. And that would be a simple thing that would be getting out to the town to say, you're in Phase 2, or for that matter, if your water department would like to hear from you and make sure that you say that they can contact you, that you approve the robocall.
I would think that ends up being part of our resident contact card discussion, because
It
I think
will
that
be.
comes out of it, you know.
Yeah, I would think that would be part of it. Isn't that what goes out on the card?
But that's
Well,
a good
no-
point, because nobody's automatically signed up for it. You
Mm-hmm.
have to say, I want to be on the list.
Right.
That's an important point.
But I will say that on the robocall, you give your permission by signing into the website, so it doesn't, that question will not need to be on a separate card. But in addition to the reasons Ian stated, you know, they can get down to as little as a street or a half street. So when we hit construction, you know, having them on there saying, you know, on Tuesday, your street's gonna be cut off and things like that, it will be wonderful. So, I mean, I think it would be a good thing to mention, and the only thing would be to review the steps to sign up for us, because we all did it, but I don't remember where we sign up or how to tell the people.
Well, also, people change phone numbers. I mean, it's, even if you've signed up for it in the past, you may have forgotten to contact the department and let them know that you have a new phone number or a new means of contacting.
All right, I can bring that up, unless Dan, if Dan shows up, I'll let him do it, but
No, I
otherwise.
told you Dan is not gonna be
No,
able to.
no, on the 22nd,
Selectmen.
selectmen
Oh.
meeting.
Okay.
But
POS.
sometimes he comes to those, particularly if it's going to be something that's going to be relating to him, so if not, I'll bring it up. Anything else that anybody thinks is pertinent to bring up?
I just think you need to push the selectmen a little bit, maybe the town administrator, to say, hey, our group is people are asking us more and more, you know, when does the construction package go out for bid? And when do we anticipate, you know, awarding contracts, and when do we anticipate construction starting? I don't think this committee's heard from anybody recently about what that status is, other than saying, okay, the drawings as they exist, 90%
Yeah,
are on the website.
yeah, I think you sent me an email with that, and I think somewhere in here I have that, but I will add those.
The other one I might add, you know, wait and see what happens till then, what comes up, but depending on what happens today with Chris, would be to continue to, you know, try to get some wastewater space so we can, you know, get going.
Yeah, the information center, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, Larry said he's gonna follow up with that, but if we haven't heard back by then, I will bring that up as well.
Well,
All right.
here he is. Oh, no.
No, that's not him.
My suggestion is we just plow on with the liaisons and let's get going.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we almost have to.
All right, so I got a bunch of stuff to give out anyway.
So Noreen and I kind of teamed up and created this.
So if everybody would take one each of those three.
Oh, it's getting complicated.
Yeah. Yes, I didn't put them together the way I usually do, I know.
I'm gonna start
And
bringing
there are
paper
extras
clips
for
then.
the, extras for the audience. These are slippery.
Thank you.
That's smart to do it that way. They're hard to get apart.
They are. They're slippery. Critics.
Well, I'm not smart enough to know how to shoot the folding
Yeah.
button. Can you give me two of these?
Yes, I will.
We're giving
Wow.
Chris a lot of time with those slippery documents.
Sorry, I didn't get those together for you.
No.
They're the same, did I give you?
Huh?
No,
Feel free.
so far,
That's fine.
thank you.
Well, so at any rate, in the course of, looking at maps last time and areas and, the large phase two and other things, we plunged right into a discussion of liaisons and many good comments were brought up.
Here's Chris.
Okay, before you get started, he just
Okay.
walked in. You're up.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
So I apologize in advance. We're having a little bit of some staff difficulties. We're running short on staff is the bottom line. So I was going to try to type up the questions that you had and the responses so you would have them. I just didn't have the opportunity to do that. So I apologize in advance.
Excuse me, what questions?
Sharon sent me questions on January 2nd in wastewater.
Oh, okay, I'm not familiar with them.
Oh, I assume that they were shared with the,
I sent you questions? I know,
it says from wastewater or to wastewater.
What's
Well,
that?
let me so it says, hi, Chris, from Sharon. We have you first on the agenda to talk about the Barnstable County Loan Program. However, we would like an update on the status of the Phase 2 project.
oh, all right, okay, because the original,
Because you had me scared there. I'm like, is there a different Sharon that I'm supposed to be responding to?
well, see, originally it came from,
Maybe.
originally it came from Evan,
I
because
have a
he
lot of
said you
girls,
wanted.
a lot of women in my life. I'm used to responding to them.
It was like, I don't particularly remember doing, but it was connected to Evan asking to put you on the agenda because you wanted to talk about this.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, all right, so we're on the same
We're all,
page
we're
now.
all on the same page.
All right.
So I guess the good news is we, continue to make some pretty good progress, even though, in staffing-wise, just to kind of get it out there, I do have one staffer, Ann, is out on a medical condition, so she's been out for a month or so. So I'm down one, and staff makes a difference when you're down staff. And then Evan, I had to make a tough decision. He did not survive his probationary period, so we're going back out. I do have Bob Lawton downstairs. A lot of people know Bob. So I want to say he's an equivalent to me, where he has a lot of experience and he can get a lot done. So I do have help. But so there's a little bit of disruption, but we'll work through it as best we can. In terms of the questions, on the Barnstable County Loan Program, I did meet with, and I thought it was a very productive meeting with the gentleman that runs that program. And what I had inquired with him in regards to is, since your program follows the same statute the town would have to work under if we wanted to do our own loan program, that statute has two elements to it. One is that you have to get reimbursed, the entity that puts out the loans has to get reimbursed for the equivalent of the amount that the money is borrowed for. So in the county's case, if they borrow money at 3%, they have to get 3% back. And then there's a 2% charge that they could put on, up to 2% charge that they could put on for administering the loans. So I said to him, I invited him down, and I said, you guys run a program where you have that as your criteria. What would happen in the circumstance that if, and again, that's a if, the town of Harwich were to send you $100,000 that we funded from free cash, so there is no borrowing cost, would the 3% go away? And he said, yes. So now I have a yes from him, and I have a yes from Jack Units, the county administrator, for the concept. So the onus is now on me to take a concept, document it, and then send it into them to get an official blessing for them to do.
Giorgio never really answered, is it legal for us to pay, for us to agree to pay extra money to help our neighbors out?
He did, and I do have, one of the things, I got an email from Larry, and I just got an answer back yesterday on a question, so I got to take some of this material that I get and circulate it. So, I mean, there's a lot of material that come in. But Giorgio basically said that we could duplicate what the county does. We would have to do it through special legislation.
Right.
And then the special legislation route, would take however long it takes to
we have
get
time.
through the legislative process. So we can design what we want to design. So really the question, I think for you guys, what my thought process is, just to kind of to finish the overall thought, is to put together a program, send it to the county and say, for phase 2, people that are identified in phase 2, we would like to have the following elements available to them. What the elements would be you would have to be in the phase 2 or phase 3, subsequent phases of the work that we're going to do. They would be eligible for the loan program as funded by the town. So they would be, obviously right now, anyone that wanted to get a loan could go to the county and opt to do this. So they have that option. The second program would be, in order to avail themselves of the zero interest on the interest piece, that we would send them a listing of those properties that are eligible, and then second, the criteria for eligibility, and that we would ask the county to basically administer 2 programs. One is, I would call it a social safety net program. People that meet certain income restrictions and certain income requirements would be eligible for the zero. And then everyone is right now eligible for their traditional program. So the things that I would need to do, and this is where I did ask Evan, that I think this board, your board, had done some work on laying out that criteria. Who would be eligible, who would not be eligible from an income standard. So that would need to be vetted out. Really what I wanted to do was to just do 2 things. One, see, did the county have any interest in entertaining this, a program on top of their existing program? And then the second part, which I didn't get to, I talked about the 3% goes down to 0. I then talked to them about, and I thought I would push this, but afterwards I hesitate a little bit. I said, can we take the 2% and make that 1%? So then people would theoretically be able to go out and get a loan for a borrowing of only 1%. After conversation with them, I assumed that the 1% would be that they would just let people borrow money and then they just send the payment coupons and, manage the loan. That I didn't think that was altogether that difficult. Well, they don't just do that. They really and I apologize if this comes out, but they really handholds people through the process. So they actually go, they help people select the vendors, they kind of vet the vendors, they then make sure the vendors submit the right bills, and then they pay it. So I had a hard time in my conversation with him saying, well, you should go from 2 to 1, because that's a higher level of effort. So what I would propose, and certainly what I wanted to do, was just explore, because I think the selectmen wanted me to explore, is this concept viable to basically have a standalone program that's part of the county would administer it, and really that, depending upon how much money the town of Harwich was to send, would then create the amount of eligibility for people. And then we need to send the eligibility standards that we want. And I was gonna inquire with you guys to see what elements of eligibility make sense. The last thought, and then I see the hand up, that I did ask him, the gentleman, which I cannot remember his name.
Is it Kendall? Was it?
It was
Kendall.
Kendall. I said, what has been your loan program's experience with other towns? What level of interest have you received? Now, my numbers aren't going to be precise here, but just in general. I think he said that there was about 500 or 600 connections in the town of Chatham, and they've only had about 15 to 20 inquiries for loans. There's about 1,800 or 1,400 in the town of Falmouth, and I think he said he had about 50. So right now, under their existing program, they have fairly small percentages when you look at those numbers that are available. What my thought was is to try to target and see if we could come up with 50 to 100,000 out of free cash, send it to them over the next year or two, and say we anticipate out of the 600, I can't remember, 620, 650, whatever the number of units are or properties are, that we anticipate maybe about 50 or 60. So 50, if you had 50 people that were potentially eligible at $10,000 cap for each, that would be about $50,000. So just in terms of the math and trying to understand, but that's what I had discussed with them. Kendall seemed very positive in his reaction. Jack Unit seemed positive in his reaction. They said, write something up and give us something to consider. So what I'd like to do is if you guys can help with the criteria for eligibility, then I'll put something together, send it first to the Board of Selectmen. Certainly, I'm just the administrator, so I think this is a policy decision for the Board of Selectmen. Let them weigh in on it, and then send it to the county for their consideration.
Okay, so you threw a lot out there, so I've got to break it down. So one portion of this is for low-income people, and you're suggesting that we put aside money so that they would be paying at 0%. Is that correct?
2%. The county
fee.
loan program is, basically, it's the loan portion, how much they borrow money at. So if we send them money, that becomes from 3 to 0.
Okay.
And then the administration stays at the 2 is the recommendation I would make.
So for low-income people, you're suggesting they would buy loans at 2%?
Correct.
Okay, so that's one. But you're not suggesting any offset to the actual principal? That was part of what I had presented in September.
I'm not sure I understand offset to principal, so a grant?
Yeah, yeah. That was that whole September presentation, was if you made X amount, the Board of Selectmen would decide, perhaps we would give you 2,000 back, or 3,000 back, or 500 back, or whatever the Board of Selectmen decide. I just want to get the facts now. I don't want to debate the issue, so.
Yeah, I think if you want to, have an element of having people, I didn't explore that with Kendall, that if somebody has a $10,000 bill, could they use, just as your example, $2,000 in a cash subsidy towards that to then make their borrowing even less.
Right.
I didn't explore that. I think certainly what I kind of got out of him is it's up to us.
Right.
I did sit last night in the selectmen's meeting, and the majority of the selectmen seem very concerned about spending money and the tax impact of borrowings. Lower County Road seemed to be the focal point of what they were doing last night. So I do hesitate a little bit about any kind of program that's gonna be of substantial dollars, because then that would be, the taxpayers would have to come up with that money to
Okay.
subsidize.
I'm just trying to get the facts laid out, but on your last comment, I would just personally disagree, and I would think many people in the town would be happy to vote to help their neighbors out, but I could be wrong on that. All right, so at any rate, as it stands right now, you're proposing for low-income people right now that they would be able to borrow at 2%. You're further proposing that all the other people who don't have some kind of low-income status would be able to borrow at what percent?
Right now, through the county program,
I
they're
know,
eligible
I
for
know, I know, yeah.
5%.
But you're proposing,
I didn't have, the proposal I would have is just for low income.
Okay.
The experience, and I think even from what Kendall had indicated,
okay, all right.
with those other towns, such a high
Yeah.
percentage are already using the
Yeah,
private sector
I-
of that.
As I say, I just want to get the
Yep.
facts out before we debate it. So, but you mentioned 1%, so who would be eligible for that 1% you just
I
mentioned?
originally considered doing and asking the county to decrease their administrative from 2 to 1%.
Right,
But after hearing the level of effort that goes into helping people, I don't think
Okay.
that that's advisable.
all right, so, so in this proposal, there's a lowered amount for loans for some people with some lower income status, but nothing for the population. I'm just getting the facts, I'm not arguing. Nothing,
At this point, I haven't explored us duplicating what the county does. I don't know if I follow you.
okay. All right. Well, you know, it's time to write articles. There's a large group of people who would like to see the loan amount be lower for everyone. In other words, if, you know, forget the low-income thing, that's being addressed in some fashion. Maybe we would revisit that. But the rest of the people would like to see the town somehow accommodate them with a lower interest. Very much so. I mean, so, you know, many people are hoping there'll be 2 articles in May. One article to accommodate the lower income people with some kind of an offset for the actual principal of the expense. And the second article to be to find the money to lower the interest rate for the general populace without any low-income status. That's what we're hearing from the people, so.
I mean, to be perfectly honest, I guess I would have to have the Board of Selectmen give me direction. I mean, they're
Right.
elected officials, they are more in touch with the electorate if they want to have us try to
Right.
come up with. That would require, though, just to be clear, any subsidy that we're going to create, so if we want to create a pool of $1 million, as a for
Right.
instance, we have to go to the marketplace. That may or may not be eligible for SRF funding.
That's fine.
And then we would have to borrow money at 3 or 4%, which then gets added to the tax rate to subsidize people being able to hook up.
Right. And
It's a policy decision, that's not,
I'll be done in 1 second. Exactly. If the neighbors want to do that to help them, then, you know, they would understand that. But before I hand it off, I just wanted, in this discussion, are we ever going to discuss going through the state community septic program as opposed to the county community septic program? It's the same percentage, but just for the ease of applying for it and the convenience to the residents. It's another thing that would require an article, and it's just nothing we've ever had a discussion about. It's the same 5%. The only difference is that the town applies for it, and then the residents would apply to either the Board of Health, or it might be another department. We can kind of set the rules, and we give out the loans. We do the approvals, we give out the loans. So it just seems like we've never had a discussion about it in the town. So,
we certainly could.
Can I just jump in on something? Chris, you mentioned before when you were talking of sort of like participation rate, you were guessing maybe 50 people, 50
Yes.
homeowners might use it. Well, 10,000 cap apiece, that's $500,000.
Oh,
I think you
sorry.
mentioned 50. It's a much bigger number.
Much bigger
Is
number.
my point. And I would just say that And I understand you try and fund that out of free cash, but even free cash isn't free.
We wouldn't be able to go to 500,
You know,
maybe
so-
able to do 100.
So I think we have to be realistic as to who might be able to qualify for this. And my suggestion is, the first thing you look at is what requirements the assessors use, for instance, when they look at either deferring real estate taxes, because they have a criteria in place. I don't know what it is, but they have some criteria in place. I don't know how many people participate in that. Especially in East Harwich, I don't know, but I would start with that criteria. The other thing is, I think if we're gonna do this, this is gonna go for I think it's gonna keep rolling over for all phases of this wastewater program. So it's gonna go on, after we get done with phase 2, it's gonna go to phase 3. I mean, you have to be fair with people and say if you're gonna set it up, it's gonna be, same criteria, same whatever, as we roll this out. So it's gonna go on for 40 years, in essence. And then the question always becomes, how you gonna administer it? Because even though you send money to the county, there's gonna be something your staff or somebody's gonna have to do along the way. I'd also say that from my experience with the county is that typically, and I think the gentleman who was here before us, if someone comes and applies to them for a septic system now, typically within 72 hours, they turn that around, if not sooner. So it's not a lengthy process, it's not a lot of paper that you need to back it up.
It's like a 1 or 2 page application.
It's not much, and, I think you just have to check some things, make sure your financial information is correct or whatever, and off you go. So I think that program works pretty well. It's just the cost of it.
Madam Chair, not to sound like a Debbie Downer, but how do you administer when someone defaults on the loan? How would that be handled?
The county has that now, they run the program, and generally, I think what the answer I got, everybody that borrows money or loans money out has a default rate, and they try to keep their default rate to, 2 or 3% overall, so they borrow, for X 100, 100 loans, and for every 100 loans they borrow, they may have 2 or 3% that default. They do, in part of the statutes, do allow them that they can put encumbrances or liens on properties, so as properties get transferred or sold after the default occurs, they can recover their money that way. But like any bank, it's the money they make, that 2% surcharge that they make on the administrative fees and the 3% that they charge people, that they do get enough income to offset some of those defaults. So it's like any other traditional bank in terms of that. They do anticipate a certain amount of default. The nice thing about using the state statutes is that you will have some opportunities. A person that is in danger of default that wants to work with the county does have many of the same things that we have for our local taxes, that they can do a deferral program and things of that nature. So by staying within the confines of the statute, it does give the county a lot of latitude in terms of helping people that are in distress. And just one thing, I've heard before that they say, everyone should be eligible and everyone should have that. They are like a bank, and if you have a house that's in the middle of a wetlands or in a tidal zone that wouldn't be able to get a traditional mortgage, you're probably not going to be able to get a loan through them if you don't meet basic criteria. So they do have lending standards that they use. So when they say that they loan 99.9% loans, those are for people who are eligible for a loan in the first place. Because I want to make sure that some people don't think, oh, I'm going to buy a piece of swamp and go and put up a house, and I'm going to be able to borrow money. That wouldn't happen under this. So they do have traditional criteria that they follow for borrowings.
So you asked about criteria. When I made the chart that I did up in September, I did a little research on, there's so many of them, as you know. I mean, there's the HUD standards, the energy standards. I couldn't believe, how many different sets of criteria were out there. But at any rate, what I want to say about the assessing ones for the senior exemption is that I was told that we only give out 50 of those a year in the whole town. I find those income levels very, very stringent. you know, I was hoping to do more for our neighbors than those income levels. I mean, those are, you know, I don't know how to judge them because this isn't my field, you know. But at any rate, I did study a lot of them and come up with, you know, a scenario that had some basis in fact, and that's what I submitted last September. But when you mention asking, you know, to determine criteria on a slightly different from assessing thing, I would have to say personally that that's not my background and I'm not qualified. I would think the assessors and other people, you know, in real estate and used to checking their assets or a banking background or something like that might be more qualified because, or perhaps there are other people on the committee. But, I mean, when I presented that in September, it was with the idea of handing it off to administration and assessing to take the ball and go from there.
Yeah, I don't think, you know, I had a chance to look at some of the material. I tend to agree that the approach that you took makes sense. I mean, now I'm on the Affordable Housing Trust, I'm actually chairman of the Affordable Housing Trust, and, you know, you have the income standards of 80% of the SHI, I can't remember the, what that stands for.
Yeah,
but
HEAP and all those.
yeah, there's a lot of different terms. But what I kind of understood was, you know, we've done, and just for the, since we're, you know, on camera here, we have done a lot for people that already that are elderly that meet income criteria because we have the angel provision, so we have the work-off provision, the angel provision. When we got the special legislation that did, it's on, I believe it's on the governor's desk now to increase that standard from 1,000 to 1,500. So that looks like that is a go, that is
How
gonna
many do we have
happen.
though doing that? How many people?
I don't think it's very many. All these situations, I don't doubt you when you say 50 for the other one.
Well, that's what I was told by the
But
assessor.
what I heard from you guys, and I think this makes a lot of sense, is that those are for people who are elderly and have low income.
Right.
And can we have a program that isn't limited to just elderly? And the concept here would be if you do the housing standard, 80% of median income, you know, state-determined income, then that may open it up, the eligibility, without the element of age, which I thought was
So
really the intent of
You're
what
saying
you
the
guys
same,
wanted.
the same limits as the senior exemption now has? See, I think that's way too low. I really do. I mean, it's, just so other people will know, that right now is for single, 31 to 36, depending on certain factors for a single, and for married, 47 to 54, depending on certain factors. I think that's very, very low.
Yeah, no, just to be clear, I think Peter mentioned that, you know, that may be a road to go to use a standard that the assessors currently use. What I'm kind of saying is, I'm happy to use whichever standard kind of makes sense.
Right.
So if you want to use a housing standard, I know in housing they have 80%, 50%, and 30% of median income to determine different eligibility for the type of housing vouchers, if you would, that are available to folks. And that's something that we need to have a discussion. 80% of the median income, I think, for a family of four is $74,000. That was one number that just stuck out to me at one of my things. So, you know, where do we want to go? In the housing standards, they do have the housing standards are really driven by the number of people in the house. So it could be for a single person, it could be down to, you know, 45,000. With 4 people in the family, it could be 74,000. But I think we should look at some of those numbers and see where does it make sense to give some consideration to. But I'm open to,
Yep. No,
I
sounds
just think
good.
we need to have a standard that's able to be administered.
I think you have to be realistic as to how many of these loans you're gonna be able to give out. Because if, you're not gonna do 50 at 10,000 apiece.
Right.
I mean, I just don't see that number being there. But if it's $100,000 you're talking about, and let's say it's even as low as $5,000, that means you're gonna do 20 at the most. And then, you know, do you take these applicants, here's the criteria, you take the applicants as they come in and do it? Or do you somehow rank them? Because if you get more people applying, I mean, if it's basically free money, you know, a lot of people might apply. But then how do you screen out and say, okay, this person submitted on this date, they're eligible first? I mean, how do you do it? Because you're gonna run out of money pretty quick, I think. You know, so you gotta think through that a little bit. You know, what is the real criteria?
I think the way I had envisioned in my mind, and obviously this is vision, so I'm trying to just figure out, but being a government person too, I mean, you have to have some kind of process. So I think you would open up the date of eligibility and then first come, first serve, and then let's see what kind of level of interest we get. And if we send 100,000, 100,000 is gone in 2 weeks, then I think the town has a decision to make. But what I had in mind is that if we set the criteria for, again, like a social safety net for everyone, and the county, it goes to the county, so the person calls, am I eligible? Nope, not eligible for the safety net program, but you are eligible for our traditional program, that then they are given options. And then people, in the experience in other towns is, again, close to 90% of people are going to the private sector to get loans. I know in my own conversations with some folks, they say, well, now that I know I have 2 or 3 years, I'm just gonna start saving up money, I'm gonna plan ahead, or I'm gonna make other arrangements. So the percentage that we're gonna have to address, and I agree, Peter, that we wanna be careful how we set it, because if we set it to a rate that's gonna be lower than the marketplace, then we're really gonna drive people to that program. If we wanna have it as a true social safety net, that you only have certain income requirements that, you know, are gonna be able to be met, now you are gonna be able to get down to that lower percentage and help people truly that are more desperately in need.
And if I could, the other thing is just the timing of this whole thing, because it's gonna take us 2 years to, you know, dig everybody up and, you know, get people connected, probably longer, because you're gonna allow them 2 years after the pipes and the main lines installed, so it could be 3, 4 years. And the county loan program, if I remember right, you know, requires, let's say, you know, you're gonna do a septic installation, requires you to at least show the bid document, says, hey, I got a quote from somebody, and here's what it is, and it might even require an inspection at the end that says, okay, it really was done, and, you know, here's the final payment. So there'll be folks on the first 3 streets that, you know, will want their money now, and there could be some folks 3 years later that still wanna be in the program, but we ran out of money along the way. So, I mean, you know, there is a fairness issue here. I don't know how you deal with it.
And I do agree, I mean, in my mind, it would be for phase 2, we would anticipate, use a standard that out of the 650, we anticipate 5% or 10%, some number, put a number on there for what people would be eligible for, and then, at least in the way I've always been thought, always think, if we're gonna do it for phase 2, we should be prepared to do it through phase 8. And maybe keep that same criteria of the approach regarding each one.
I'm bothered by the talk about running out and eligibility. When, you know, this has been put forward many times by many different people over the years. As I say, number one, the main component at the time was offsets, not lowered loans. But, you know, the idea was that it goes to town meeting with an article that says to the voters, you know, are you willing to spend an extra $1 million, you know, to help your neighbors, and then, you know, 2 years later, start a fund, and 2 years later, add more to it, and continue it through all the phases that are needed. So I would hate to think that somebody would be under pressure that they can't control of a construction schedule or something like that. But that aside, what I continue to hear, and I get a lot of financial questions, is that the people without a low income factor also very much would like the town to consider a lower interest rate. So, I mean, I can't let that go right now. I mean, there are a lot of people out there who really want that. If the town doesn't write an article to that effect, I'm sure that it will come in by petition. One way or other, it's going to be on the May town meeting warrant. And personally, I support it. I don't think there's anything wrong. I mean, we did a lot of things in this project to try to equalize in some manner the costs of those who were not going to be sued as opposed to the costs of those who were going to be sued. But we all know it's not a perfect, you know, slate. And the other thing is there certainly is an aggravation factor for the people in the first couple of phases. You know, I'm going to have to replace my septic tank, you know, but I got probably a span of 5 to 10 years to decide when to do that. Whereas the people in phase 2 and phase 3, they have to do it in the next 3 years, you know. So that's why I'm willing to accommodate my neighbors with a lower interest rate if they're not low income. And if they are low income, then a lower interest rate, but more importantly, an offset.
Yeah, I think if anyone wants to submit a, special petition article, I would just, invite, them to come in, meet with me, just to make sure we can get the
Right.
appropriate form, so we can do that. I mean, just with that said, and I hear it from one, I'm not hearing it from five, so I guess I at least highlight that in my own mind. But, if you wanted to utilize additional funds and expand that program, I don't see why that concept that I brought up about going to the county, if it was the desire of the community to do what you're suggesting, which, again, that's a policy question. That's not a Chris question. That's a policy question or administrative question. If you wanted to open that up and try to have funding available for the 600 people that are going to be part of this, conceivably, we could put together a general override or a debt exclusion override, something that would figure out what the math is, 10,000 per unit, and then do the number of units, and then open that up.
Right.
So I think that concept is open. It's really, I mean, again, I heard last night that $11 million of spending is creating a financial hardship, because anything we put into the overall program does ultimately end up on the tax rate. And I heard last night, how do we decrease that? So I appreciate what you're saying, but asking to spend more money on a program that's already $30 million in
I mean,
to subsidize it's
we're all
really
gonna-
a selectman's question.
We're gonna have different opinions, yeah, and that's why I brought it in September to the selectmen. But at the time, I was told that Giorgio had some information, he was gonna answer my questions and bring it back. It has been 4 months.
He did respond earlier, is special legislation. I'll send that to Sharon, she can
All right.
distribute it to the board.
All
Yeah, I'll send you what he sent me.
Yeah, it's been a long time, so.
He did provide that.
So did he come up with a program? Because that night he said, I believe I have something that's going to answer Mr. Lenahue's questions.
It's special legislation.
Yeah,
Special
great, we got
legislation.
plenty of time, yeah.
I just throw it out that if, we want to help people in some way, call it our neighbors, whatever, it may be more appropriate to focus on the first couple of years of the actual operating costs and providing some relief there, because in addition to the capital costs of hooking up to the sewer, they're going to be charged the operating costs of the system. And if we can minimize that for everybody that's connected, maybe that's a better way to do it and a cleaner way to do it. It all comes down to money. If it ends up being 600 houses at $10,000 a piece, do we feel comfortable going to go out for $6 million and put it in the bank? It's going to cost us money to borrow that.
Well, we wouldn't be giving them the full 10,000. I mean,
Well, I don't know. If you're gonna have a fund that's gonna lend out money and you're gonna establish it, you gotta have the money available, even though it's gonna get paid back at some interest rate that's lower, and eventually we have to borrow that money instead of just saying
Right,
we're gonna live
that's
off of
true.
free cash, because
Right.
I think you're in an unusual year for free cash, is my
Yeah,
guess.
we're not gonna be able to sustain $3 and $4 million in free cash for every year. That's an absolute safe bet.
And at some point, you may be saying, okay, do I put 100,000 in free cash over here to cover that? And by the way, I have to go borrow to do this, and I would have spent, free cash to do it otherwise. So, I mean, there's a cost to everything, No easy answer.
That it?
So just a couple other things that you had, or maybe Evan had on the list here. On the RFP to send out, has the RFP for the, I don't want to call it the outreach coordinator, project manager. So we do have, I think, do we have the final version of?
I haven't seen it, no.
Okay. I thought that, that you guys had submitted through a final version, if not, just on the specs
Well,
of
we have the final version of the spec, but we don't have the final version of the.
the scope.
Now translated to an RFP. Right, you go out. and-
Do we have the scope of services,
We do.
though? Okay.
We agreed to that, we voted on that two or three meetings ago.
December
The selectmen
17th.
voted on it.
Selectmen voted on it, you guys voted on it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we got passed on this one.
Okay.
But I think now, Chris, the next step is to translate that scope of services to the RFP.
Okay. So I will put that on my to-do list. Just on where are we on the design, about 90%, they're now submitted to the regulatory agencies, so we have the application and the scope of the project into DEP for their review. I believe it has gone to conservation because there are wetlands issues, that we have some of the pump stations are in close proximity to wetlands, so we had to move them outside of that 50-foot buffer in the wetlands. So I know that that element, they are in the process of getting the approvals, regulatory approvals. And then once we're done with the regulatory approvals and the bid documents are complete, I do want to just kind of publicly thank Dan Pelletier. Went through those 90% plans and really went through them in pretty good detail. Had several comments that he submitted back to CDM. So we're trying to get those bid documents, make sure that we have all the different components in those documents. The contracts, I think we're still on the timeline that has been presented previously, where the contracts and the bidding will be done in March and April with kind of a May timeline. I know Dave Young had submitted, and that's the same timeline that we have, so whatever we had submitted before, 2 or 3 months, 6 months ago, that's the same timeline we're still working with, unless we see something in the regulatory approvals that delay us. That timeline will be what we're continuing to do. And then, just as a reminder to folks, the concept is to have the project broken up into 2 pieces, so 2 smaller contracts to be given with the idea that we get a better representation in the marketplace. We have been in coordination with the town of Chatham. Chatham will also be going out to do some sewer work. They have an obligation on their side to increase their phase to match up with our phase, because we have to send it to material that's going to go down Chatham pipes. So we have about once a month a coordination meeting with Chatham to make sure that we have that component underway. So I think we will be seeing basically 3 contracts, 2 in Harwich and 1 in Chatham, probably all go out within the span of about a month or so apart, I think is the last discussions that we had. So we're still very much in that sequence. We didn't have a meeting last month, so I think we will have one later this month to make sure that coordination is continuing to go. But, you know, the discussion was, is it better or worse to have us go out first or have Chatham go out first, or how does that do in the marketplace? I think the answer that we got to that is that there should be plenty of interest. This is very specialized work doing sewers, so it's not similar to, you know, work that's maybe building a house where you have a different marketplace. So at least I'm being told by both sides, I think in some of our discussions, that there should be plenty of interest, so there'll be a competitive bid process, which obviously the more bidders you have, the more competitive the price will be, has been my experience.
Chris, are all the pump station easements or whatever easements you need in place, or?
Yeah, actually,
Underway,
on
or-
that, and just to, we had to make some, tried to make some concessions. So I went around and met with people, and in some cases, people that, how do I want to put this nicely, had a higher focus on how much money they were going to get. I did, where we were able to, we redesigned it, and some of them are in the right-of-way, so we avoid having to do the takings. So I think in total, and we did add one on Hayden Lane, what's?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I can't remember there was one that, at one of the public meetings, they said, and that one we were able to do in the public way. So I think there's 3 of them that we've been able to do in the public way, and then there's 4 or 5 that will, I think there's 4 that we need the easements. I have met with everybody that, on the property owners, and I got the final plans for the easement locations from CDM. Some of them came in mid-December. I have all the material. I just sent, I think it was last week, all the material to KP Law. So they will be coming out with the order of taking that the Board of Selectmen, acting as sewer commissioners, will have to vote. And what that order of taking will include is the 4 private pump stations, the easements on private property that we would need to secure. I still need to do the whatchamacallit, the order of taking, once the board does the order of taking, it almost acts like eminent domain, so it gives us access to that, so that's something that goes on file. We then need to, which we have a appraiser lined up, have the appraiser go through and assess what the value is of those takings, and then we will do a letter to the 4 property owners saying that this is what we found for value. We do have in the budget a certain amount for those properties, for those takings. So we have 4 pump stations. There's 2 cross-country runs that are both cross-country runs just for the general public. Obviously, we're trying to stay within the right-of-way to do the sewer work, so we'll be in the street. But there are a few occasions where we're going to be going off the street and going basically across parking lots or across private property. And that is up in the 400 East in the Stop and Shop Plaza to try to avoid digging up that intersection. They're doing cross-country runs. So we will have those 2 easements that will just allow for piping to go in. The other element of that, so there's 3 components. One's for the pump stations, one's for the cross-country easements, and then on the private ways. There's 15 private ways, and what we've done, Dan Pelletier again did a great job of putting together. We have water easements on a lot of these, and the question is, will the water easement be, when it was originally done, constructed in such a way where it was considered a utility easement, and therefore a utility is water, sewer, gas, so on. Can we use those existing easements? So that work is being reviewed now by KP. I actually have a meeting at 10 o'clock with John Giorgio, so I can get a sense from him for the update on those. If those easements are not sufficient, then we'll have to add those to the order of taking. So the order of taking will include the 4 easements for the properties, the 2 easements for the cross-country, and then the right-of-way for the private ways. The vast majority of the project is within the town's right-of-way, so there's no need for easement documents. The other thing, I kind of hesitate a little bit, I think there's 1 pump station that is in public property, but we may need a temporary easement for construction purposes, so we may go on to private property, if you would, in the construction of that pump station.
Any, do you know of any grinder pumps in the solution now? Do you remember? Do we eliminate grinder pumps?
There was and I'm missing, I know I got the name wrong, Hayden Lane, Hardin Lane.
Hardin Lane.
I was close. Hardin Lane, they actually, and my apologies to the residents there, I think there's 4 to 6 homes that are on that, and the plan originally had them to put their own grinders in.
Right.
And then the decision was made really at that public hearing that we had, that since it was only 6 out of 600, so 1%, that they actually put a small pump station unit, very oversized grinder pump,
Right.
really, for those 6 homes to feed into, and then it'll be pumped up to Church Street.
So it's accurate to say in the Phase 2 construction there are no grinder pumps?
No individual grinder
Right.
pumps that, I want to be careful saying that because I misspoke before, but there are going to be some homes that where the street is high and the house is set way down. So
Yeah.
there could be an individual circumstance where the home, because where it's situated, would need to have a pump to pump up to the street. So there are going to be some of those, I think, individual circumstances of having that. But overall, we're trying to have the vast majority low enough, the system's been designed low enough to feed most houses by gravity.
So once CDM Smith finishes the design, I would assume, let's just say there are 2 houses that need grinder pumps. We're going to identify those quickly to those people so they at least know.
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah, the other thing that we've
fairness.
done is on the, and I think Amy Welski has done a great job, where she went kind of on her own initiative to look at all the different locations of where the septic systems are, I'm sure in coordination with Megan. And she has identified, one of the issues came up at one of the public hearings, that, okay, if I have a septic system and the septic system is in the backyard, and now I need to run the piping around my house to come out to the front, where do we have circumstances where the septic system is within that 50-foot buffer? And what we'd like to do is to have kind of a simple administrative process where Amy would be able to sign off on people's plans to run, that there's no, so someone doesn't have to go to the expense of hiring an attorney or go in front of the Conservation Commission, that she can make an administrative determination to go forward and put those in. And she has identified, I don't remember the number of properties, less than 10. So it's a fairly small number that their system is so close to the wetlands that she probably can't administratively sign off on that, and some of the homeowners will have to come in and figure out a plan to avoid the intrusion into the wetlands. So we've taken that extra step of trying to identify so that we can target, and send letters to people saying, you may be eligible for the administrative process, or you may have to file more specifically.
Go ahead, then I have a question. Let me just ask a quick one. Didn't we discuss early on the possibility, if there was only going to be a few grinder pumps, that maybe the town would purchase the grinder pumps? Didn't they do that in Chatham?
No, the town has not done that yet.
They haven't. I know we
I
talked
think it
about,
was done in the town of Falmouth.
Yes.
maybe that was it.
Falmouth did do that.
Right,
I think what we were trying to do is, if you take the sill of the house and where the line is, that, and I hesitate, because I keep using the word vast majority, because there's gonna be an outlier out there that's gonna say, but we have where, from the sill of the house to where the pipe is in the street, we have, everybody should be by gravity. There could be some that if you have the sill of your house, but you have a finished basement and you have activity in your basement, you're gonna have to pump up to get to the sill of your house. Ironically, now I'm a Harwich resident, and I have that exact circumstance, where the downstairs has a little pump that pumps up to my system to go into the backyard. But, those individual, if the house is situated down, there may be. And that's something that I guess we could have more discussions on. Do we want to get into potentially helping purchase those pumps? What I believe the town of Falmouth did was that they did purchase the pumps on behalf of the program, and then turned it over to, and they had to buy the warranty, I think, to be
Yeah.
eligible for the SRF funding. And then they turned it over to the homeowner to hook it up. So there is an approach.
yeah, I don't remember exactly what they did, but I knew there was, and all right, then it was Falmouth,
Yeah.
where I thought that, like you said, that they did purchase them,
I think they made them all the same, too.
so that they were all the same.
Standardized.
You don't have issues, somebody, if you have an
Yes.
outage or something, and somebody
Yes.
has to go hook up and do something, it's all
That
the
everything
same.
that would, rather than having individuals do it, that
From
the-
memory, I think it was either 1,200 or 1,400, and 50% of them were grinder pumps. That was a
Yeah,
big
big
dollar.
Yeah.
Those
Yeah.
grinder pumps, $5,000 or $6,000
Right.
each.
where I don't think we would have that many here from the sounds of it. But
Well,
I'm
for
just
this-
wondering, because if somebody's going to have one, they're going to ask the question, what extra help are we going to get compared to everybody else that's going to have to do this?
Just
So,
Just a thought, though, when it comes to the grinder pumps, they were handed over to the homeowner, as I understood it, but the ongoing expense, the electricity and all that the onus was on the homeowner.
Yeah, That's correct.
So, I was in the post office yesterday, and I was being nosy, and I saw a gentleman who received a certified return receipt letter from CDM. And I thought, CDM's sending out certified return receipt letters. And I asked him, I said, any chance is there a pump station on your street? And as a matter of fact, it was. So I didn't know if you knew about CDM sending out certified return receipt. I mean, it had on the envelope, CDM.
Yeah, I'm not, actually. I'll check on that.
I was just curious what,
Yeah,
why they're sending out certified return receipts.
yeah, no. I'm at a loss on that one.
So I didn't know we were going into the other topics that quick, so just want to go back for 1 second so I understand. You mentioned, Chris, and rightly so, that you hear from one, which is me, and you make note of that. So what would be the next steps in terms of any articles for relief, in terms of you, the administration, and the Board of Selectmen? Just so, You know, I
Yeah,
get questions on this all the
I'm
time.
with you.
Yeah.
I think what I'd like to do is, you know, I'll do the social safety net piece, try to design that program, and obviously with your guys' input, I may use like 30% of the low to moderate income or some standard,
Excuse me.
but then,
But so you're talking lowering interest only when you say social safety net? I just
correct,
wanna
the
be clear.
2%.
Yeah, no offset.
And if you wanted to have it, I mean, and the only reason why I say one is that, you know, I used to have people tell me, you know, you gotta make sure you count to 3. If you have a 5-member board, you need a majority to do things. So if your board wanted to vote to send a request to the selectmen for consideration of the social safety net plus
Okay.
the wider one, I just, I need the board to help me with
Frankly, that's why I went to the board in September. I don't have the expertise to talk about income levels or anything else. Perhaps these 4 do. I don't feel that this board, as an advisory board, can take this issue any further. You know, I've been a public comment over the years, multiple times, you know. This is a policy issue. This is for the Board of Selectmen. I can't see in a million years what good another vote from another committee, after all the votes from all the committees about recommendations about income plans over the years, what would one more have on the top of that heap?
So who would be the body or person, committee, whatever, not committee, but
Yeah.
would make that decision? Who would come up
Board
with
of
that?
Selectmen.
Here's one now.
Well,
There you go.
All right, you're it.
well, as Chris has said, you know, the Board of Selectmen, and we've all discussed, we can propose some articles for the town warrant, and we could bring those back to the board and let them, you know, vote yea or nay on the warrant and whether we want to go ahead with it. It will be a serious discussion. As Chris has said, we're I think as a board, generally speaking at least, looking to see what we can do to cut expenditures this year. We've had several years of spending lots of money, which I don't apologize for. We did Cape Cod Tech, we did the sewer, we did, you know, Saugatucket Harbor. But I think the hope is that we give the taxpayers relief for a bit. And so, you know, what's going to come up is the articles, writing the articles would be the simple activity. The time it's going to be more involved is what does that mean to our taxpayers on debt relief? You know, I'm thinking myself, what's the difference between, to the homeowner, for instance, what's the difference between 2 and 5%? Is that significant to go through all this? You know, maybe it is if it goes to, you know, 1%, but, and then what's that doing to our debt load, to our tax structure? So it's going to take some time to put that together. So, and Noreen, I take your point a lot, and I generally agree with it, although to be honest, I also get feedback from other people saying, you know, we're doing a lot for the folks that, like me, being sewer now because we're putting on the general tax rate.
Yeah.
And so it's not a simple discussion, and it won't be a town meeting. But I would, and you know, I can press and we can work together, and I can work with Chris on it, to maybe draft some articles to bring back, because I do agree that if we don't, there are going to be some private petitions to do it. So we might as well try to get ahead of that, and maybe, I think my proposal based on this was to work with Chris and come up with 3 or 4 articles that we can come back with consideration, and then we'll go from there. Because in the end, you're right, it's up to town meeting, but and we got a lot of things going on, and it's not we need to present it, but then we need to present the facts behind it as well. So I'm not sure I answered your question. I probably tried to not answer it. But, you know, we'll sit down. I'll take, at least my perspective, I'll work with Chris. Maybe we can formulate a couple and bring back.
So then as far as a
We'll-
cutoff for, you know, the low income,
Right.
all right, we're going to do that. You know, that's what I'm saying is, so who, will you be looking
I
at
think
that?
to that end, you know, I think what I laid out, you know, this morning, how do we help people, not just age and income, but how do we help people in general with income? I think that there's enough interest on the board that if I can fund it through free cash, and I can put something together that has criteria that we're gonna, help maybe 10 to 20 people, so we can fund what we wanna try to fund, that we can do that. The only part that I was kind of saying, I'm prepared to kind of do that work to present that plan to the selectmen. If there's something where we're not just gonna help the low 20, and we wanna do something on a wider scale for the full 600, that's something we have to have a discussion. How far does he want me to try to design, and what do we wanna try to propose? If there are people that are gonna submit citizens petitions, it may be good to get that information to see what their thought process is.
I hate to hear if we're able to fund it through free cash, because to me, I think of this assistance, now maybe I'll be the only person voting that way in May, we will wait and see. But I think of this type of assistance as being part of the wastewater project. I absolutely think it's an integral part of the wastewater project. It should be built in, should be built into the debt. I understand SRF doesn't cover it, but just like with the high school, the MSBS didn't cover the audio-visual room, but we didn't say, well, we're not gonna have, an audio-visual room. So, we can't let the dictates of the government, decide everything that we wanna do. So, that's all I'm saying, is that I wouldn't want every year to go, well, this year we only have this much in free cash, or that, I'm proposing that it be part of the wastewater plan. That's it.
My suggestion, Madam Chair, at this point is that when you appear before the Board of Selectmen and give the monthly report, you should mention one of your items is, we had discussions around this topic, with not only our group, but, with the town administrator and our liaison from the Board of Selectmen, and that we would just like to have the board give us some guidance as to where they might be going or not going, or they hate it, they love it, they want to take it forward, or should we do something else? I just raise it as a topic and just say, okay, it's an issue, and you're right, I think it's up to the board at some point here to grab it and say, okay, we're gonna do it. Otherwise, if the board says no, or you got, in combination say, no, we're not gonna do anything this spring, well, maybe there are petition people, and let them go do it.
Right.
That's it.
I was just going to, thinking about, what you're asking us to do essentially, which I agree with Maureen. I'm not qualified to determine, as a banker would be, risk. But on the policy side, we have input, and I was going to suggest that it's not just agent income, but you might want to create silos of evaluation and have separate qualifications for those, because one might be emergency. In that 2-year window, you can have someone go from being who can afford it to no, in that limited window. And the other one would be, what about those people who apply for the county loan and fail? You have already have a risk determination right there. Even if it's if it's wetlands, that's one thing, but that still has an impact on this. So there may be a failure of other loan risk determinations that would feed into a town determination of support.
A lot of moving parts.
Usually if you fail some criteria with going to the county, you'd say, okay, there's a risk there, therefore you tend to pay a high, your alternative would tend to be a higher interest loan, but now you're going the other way.
Right, but presumably there are people who, in a narrow timeline for wastewater, the percentage paid by the loan would put them into a different category. Yeah, I agree with you on that.
The other problem is we have no idea what the market is for this.
No, we don't.
It could be one person, it could be 100, I have no idea.
Exactly.
And it could vary over time very easily. That's what I'm seeing in my neighborhood. If this happened tomorrow, there would be people who were fine and who suddenly are not fine.
Yeah, and there will be pushback from people that say, oh, wait a minute, you're giving some, let's just call it relief to the folks hooking up to the sewer, but yet my septic system just failed and I had to put a new one in. I'm not in the phase 2. How come I'm not getting any relief?
Yeah.
You say, well, you go to the county loan program. Wait a minute, now you're giving a special thing that's, discounting the county loan program. I don't get it. There's a catch-22 here.
Yeah, absolutely.
If I may, I think we've killed this subject.
Yes.
We'll follow up.
Yeah.
On the grinder pumps, I think at least my impression was when we were talking about having some homeowners having to have grinder pumps and we would help pay for it, and as Val says, the maintenance. That didn't include those people that have grinder pumps, I would say, for their personal use. In the sense, I have a neighbor that probably falls in the same category as Chris just mentioned, that he now has a grinder pump because he put a bathroom in the basement. He has no expectation of having the town pay for that grinder pump because, our commitment was to pay. When we talked about more grinder pumps, I think our hope was that if we put a grinder pump to come out from the house, the sill, we were going to cover that because that was our requirement. But not for those people that are doing it for their, in that example. So I don't
And
think
you
that,
could make that up.
that was a distinction at least we talked about initially.
I think that's a good point, that if everything is designed to the sill, and then we have individual homeowners make a decision whether they're gonna use their basement or not, they have to pump it up to the sill, but if you get up to the sill, it's designed to accommodate the individual home.
And that was our distinction before.
But, all right, let me just back up on that. That the town was going to pay for it at that.
At the sill level.
At the sill level.
But not in their basement for,
All right.
For, their individual, that's their individual decision. Ours is to take it from the house to the
All right.
I
street.
think one of the questions that came up early, like in the Hardin Lane one is a perfect example. 6 homes, and if it cost us, let's say $50,000 for a pump station versus paying for the individual grinder pumps that, let's say it was $30,000 to put that in, we were gonna look and say, okay, maybe we should pay for those pumps in lieu of doing a pump station. So I think one of the discussions I know we had with the board is in areas where it made sense to avoid the public infrastructure of putting in a pump station and just buy grinder pumps for people in their yard for the entire house. That was the approach, that we would consider paying for those, because now we're doing, it's basically in lieu of putting a pump station.
Pump station. All right, so then going back to an individual, or let's say an area where you wouldn't be connecting them all into one, all right? But there are going to be some other people that need grinder pumps. Has a decision been made that the town would pay for those and then turn it over? So that hasn't been made yet?
That hasn't been made because
All right.
we have no idea yet of what the financial implication would be. One time we were talking larger number, now we're talking maybe, I don't know, maybe a handful doing that. So we were postponing that decision until we knew more.
All right. I just had one other quick question. When you talked about March or April, is that when the bids are going out? March or April?
I believe so. I think the regulatory approvals, getting DEP to sign off, getting conservation to sign off, we need those before you wouldn't give a bidder a project that isn't been through the regulatory process. So ideally, you would go and get all your regulatory approvals, put those regulatory approvals directly into the bid documents, so that way they know what they get. There are some circumstances, I think we did this on the Muddy Creek project, where I think we had almost 22 different agencies who we had to get approvals from, and we got approvals from 20 of them, and then there was 2 that said, we don't have the ink dry yet, but this is what it's gonna look like. So we did go out to bid with all but, I think, 2, but we knew what those 2 were gonna be, so we told the bidders, here's what we anticipate, here's a draft, and here will be the final.
All right, so
But
if it only
ideally, you
goes,
wanna have
if
all
it
your
only goes
approvals.
out for bid in March and April, and how long do they have to respond? 40?
Yeah, I think he has it on a chart, I wanna say 30 days or
All right,
or
so-
45 days, something like that.
All right, so then we're into May. When were we supposed to start digging?
I think that that's going to be an interesting question. And the reason why I say that is officially when...
Actually, it's an interesting answer. We got the question.
Yeah, we got the question. And the reason, we had the gas utility. The gas utility officially, they say you're not supposed to do any work on roads, Mass DOT. You're not supposed to do any work on roads because it's a tourist, area. We did find some roads that aren't really heavily traveled or easy detours or around, And we did allow the gas company to do some work on side roads and other roads that we could easily detour during some of this past summer in the effort of getting the gas moratorium lifted. So one of the concepts here would be if a vendor came in, we could say, you know, if you take a dead end, you could put pipe in on a dead end, and then we would lay off the main roads until, the main roads would be the ones that we would avoid during the high tourist season.
All right, so I guess my question is, I think from my understanding, I thought we were telling people that some of this was going to start in May.
Well, that's why I said conceivably, they could start on some of these side roads, do
roads.
some prep work over the summer. The heavy work would really be done in the off-season, which would be the fall,
All right.
that we would start impacting some of the major roads.
Because
I
some
mean,
of they're going
137
to come
is
back with this, you know, because I think we had said May, all right? And
Yeah.
some of them are going to come back and say, all right, we also said that once it went out for a bid, it was going to be up to the contractors to decide what roads are going to be done first, all right? And some of the people are still asking questions. They're coming back to, well, when do I need to make these decisions as to where,
Yeah, one of the things, once the bid goes out and we get a successful bidder back, one of the very early things they do, they provide us with bonds and all their insurances. They will put together a construction schedule of what they see. A town, no grant or no agency that we contract with can determine the means and methods for how contractors do their work. So the contractor has to decide what approach they want to take. We could put in the bid documents, obviously, that you can't do any work on major streets in the summertime, but what that contractor decides is really going to be how many crews is he going to use, or he or she going to use, what level of effort they're going to do, you know, does that work with their work schedule from other projects and moving equipment over? It's really subjected to what the contractor that gets selected is
all right.
designs. And once we have that, you know, schedule of what they're going to do, what streets they're going to do, we do need to establish a process for notifying people, these are the roads, this is the timeline. So we'll get that timeline out there.
All right. So it might be a little bit later than what we had anticipated.
I think the only difference is gonna be, you know, they may identify what side roads they're gonna do and, you know, what they're gonna do in May versus
Right.
what they would do in September.
All right.
So as I recall, what we did in 2010 was we ran the backbone of the trunk line down 28, but that was done in the shoulder season, not during the tourist season. But most construction happened, you know, on the shoulder seasons. And it was,
That's true. That's absolutely true. Most of the heavy work that people will see consistently will be on those shoulder seasons.
All right, any more questions on that?
Not on that, but I heard Chris say he had to leave, so.
I have a 10 o'clock,
Yeah, well, we did bring up the wastewater information center. Larry said he was going to follow
We'll
up.
talk, this is the whole Elbro thing I brought up.
this
with
was
the
before
Elbro
Chris
House
came
on
in.
Maintenance Ed. Yeah, we can talk some more of that.
All right.
Before Chris leaves then, let me just, very briefly, in 1 minute, bring you up to, speed on the DHY, partnership or regional sewer. Last meeting, was very positive. I say that's a little bit surprising because it came, I think, 2 days after the bond votes failed for the Dennis and Yarmouth schools. And I thought that might put a negative umbrella over our discussions. Turns out not to be true. My understanding is, and Chris is there too, he can correct me, but that even those people that are most against the schools, if you will, are fighting out the most to see the value in this. The financial benefits are so significant that they've pretty much decided to, keep this as a separate topic rather than marry it. In the past, they've always kind of married it with the school negativity, if you will. So that's encouraging. We've had good discussions, and Don Howe's been a great representative on this in pressing and having acceptance of as much transparency as we can get, moving the deadlines up to present the budgets to the various boards of selectmen in time for finance committees and times for review. Yeah, it is a separate district, but and I've argued this a little bit, but there's no way out of it. If you're gonna have someone loan you money, they want some assurance you're gonna pay it back. It's kind of one of those facts of life that there's no way around. The issues that we're working on, CDM Smith has promised it very quickly, but the issues that affect us the most is the possibly new phasing. You know, do we bring in a different area now that we have this regional agreement? Which, you know, quite frankly, Chris, has some benefits to us. If we can get after Route 28 earlier, was part of our economic corridor, then we were able in our current phasing, but that's, you know, those discussions were ongoing. And then from I know Selectmen's requested a couple of times, and they're working on it, Chris and others, is what's that mean to our phasing financial plan, if you will? You know, if we move this up, what's the impact going to be? So those are promised any day, I guess. So we're still hoping to get this on the Springtown meeting, although it's not clear to us as a group if that's possible, because we want to all go at pretty much the same time. It won't be ideal. It could be, you know, some towns have a spring or a fall town meeting that they may want to delay it a couple months. We like to avoid that meeting if we can. So that's discussion. The timing's still a bit of a discussion, but it's moving ahead.
Yeah, that's a great point. Just to remind folks that Phase 4 under our existing plan calls for the construction of a treatment plant at the DPW site and then building the piping off of that. So the resequencing of it would be to move Phase 3, and Phase 4 would be the contribution of DHY and then coming down Route 28. The other thing that we have that we need to keep in mind in terms of the phasing is that we have, and this is good news, almost $6 million of federal funds that have been committed to the town to redo the section of 28 from Division Street to the river, Herring River. And so, and that is scheduled right now for 2022 or 2023, which is coming up. So I did have a discussion. Unfortunately, I think Larry had to go after the last DHY meeting with Dave Young to kind of see what he had. So he's putting together that plan of the resequencing of, instead of having a plant in Phase 4, contributing to a plant over in Dennis, and then how do we get the piping out from there? So that is still, I don't think I've received the final draft yet on that.
Yeah.
Once I get that, Larry and I will probably meet with Dave just to go over the details. So we're kind of looking, and there are extenuating circumstances. Certainly $6 million of federal money to redo 28 is an important piece for the town for revitalization and economic development in that area. And how do we sequence that into this project? So there's some of those decisions that are being made. But I think the overall good news is, you know, out of a $240 million project, you know, this could remove, you know, $10, $20 million by doing the DHY, and how do we capture that and keep the sequencing intact?
And just a clarification on that, should we have to change some of our phasing and accelerate some sewering in West Harwich, say, as a result of that, we would certainly never, because it's not crystal clear on the maps within the CWMP, but we certainly would never sewer Lower County Road.
That actually is one of the thought process. I believe Lower County Road, some elements close to that
I know.
are being contemplated,
I know.
and that's where the resequencing comes in, where we need to see our timing on Lower County Road, when that work would be done. Really, the goal is, I know where you're going.
We're in
We're not gonna take a brand new road and dig it up.
Yeah, I've heard this message too from Noreen, so
Yeah.
I understand that one.
All right, okay. And just another
Just to
question.
explain to people watching, Noreen's input is we don't want to tear up Lower County Road twice.
3 times.
Okay, 3 times.
Yeah.
We
Well,
agree.
I guess it's still 2 enough. But the other question in general, when you mentioned CDM Smith, so it's January, and you know, we're talking about bids coming back, and the April-May timeframe. Would CDM be considering another informational meeting for this spring for Phase 2?
We could certainly,
I mean, nobody's asked for one, but it seems like it's been a while. I don't know how long it's been. I think it's been since last year or last summer. Whatever, it's been a while, you know.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. I do think, however, that we need to look at it in context. If we get the project manager and how good that information
Right.
flow goes. The website's been revised. It looks great, by the way, of Caleb's. Caleb, raise your hand.
he heard.
That looks great. I think that's a piece of the puzzle, but I wouldn't make that, I wouldn't make that absolute right now. I think
No,
we need
no,
to
no,
consider
it's
going
just
forward.
something
Yeah.
to start to think about. They often do around April anyway, so,
Well, I'm just,
right.
I think it would be, once we have some really good information,
Right.
when things are gonna happen, would be more likely to have it then than
Yeah.
just to say we're gonna have it in April if we don't really,
no, that's the piece we need to look at.
yeah.
But
Have,
we have-
have it when the bids are
Yeah,
back.
it may be good to have it when the bids are in and we know the schedule, so that we can
Yes.
kind of really give people a good, clear understanding.
Okay, and then you two are going to look at the information center.
Yeah, as I said, I brought up to the Board of Selectmen's meeting in Alborough House. I think that needs a discussion. Do we have, I don't know, room there? Does a liability? We just need to do some things to look at that.
All right.
There hasn't been another full board discussion on that concept.
I mean, does that have to get on their agenda to be discussed, or?
Yeah,
I guess what we're saying is we'd like it sooner than later to get something going, that we would have a place to put up some of this information, even when the new project manager
it
would
has to
come
be
on
on,
board.
I want to put it on the agenda because the Alborough House has always been a bit of a bone of contention. We spend money on it, then what's its use? And how are we going to use it? What's the plan for the Alborough House? And we've had, we've used it temporary for some things, but we need to just bring it back and have a discussion. I'm not saying people are going to object to it. I'm just saying that it's been a point of discussion in the past.
It was specifically brought up once, and there was not I don't think there was an action taken about using it. I think even when Peter
We
was
brought-
still on.
yeah.
That has been a
And
while.
I don't think,
I-
that was a long while.
That was one
ago.
of the discussion about what are you doing at the middle school versus
Yeah.
this,
Right.
versus we
And
tore down
and
the
I brought it up
garage.
like a month or so ago, and we had just a brief discussion. We
Right.
didn't come to a conclusion, so
Yeah.
we need to follow up.
I think the important thing is, you're gonna have a project manager that's gonna need a home.
Yeah.
You're gonna need, it calls for 2 summer students, they're gonna need a place at least to work out of.
Yeah.
You're gonna need to have this library of, information. You're
Yeah,
gonna need a
yeah,
place where the
right.
public can come in and actually sit down and have a discussion with some people. And I think you need to be fairly close to, the rest of town government, so, you can run over the
And-
Board of Health and that kind of stuff.
And I know,
so-
Peter, I brought those points up in general, but we didn't follow
Yeah.
through because our mind.
But it's more than someone sitting at a desk buried in somebody's office
Yeah.
back here,
Our attention is that, when I brought it up, was focused on getting the scope of services passed, so we could move ahead in RFP, but I'll ask Julie, we bring it back.
All right,
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
all right.
Thank you, Chris. I can bail out too, right?
Take this, and that. All right, it is 10 after 10. Do we want to start this?
I have 20 minutes left myself,
Yeah,
so
let
I
me
think we
go.
should.
All right,
at
go
least
ahead.
Talk about,
Yeah.
you mean on the
Go ahead.
liaison thing?
Yes. Okay, so, back to my intro. So, we looked at, different styles of working liaisons into our plan. And, that led to a discussion in general on what is a liaison, how strict is their role, how soft is their role. And I know Ann went and talked to Dan and got a very good suggestion, and he's been in touch with Ann and with I. So this leads into the liaison description, which I'll get to in a second, because Val and I also prepared a list of things to trigger a conversation. And I know from my own background in utilities, from running a utility company, I don't know why, but postcards and door hangers always seem to have, really great success when you're asking utility questions. So Dan used a postcard method to answer some questions last year to do with irrigation systems. So what I'd like us to talk about is, okay, is to, our discussion last time was, do we have the right to send this kind of information to people? Do we want to invade their privacy? Where do the parameters lie? So what I'm suggesting for discussion based on Dan's suggestion is that we draw up a postcard with 3 or 4 questions. You can't have too many. You see his suggestions back from a little bit ago, and of course have the other side be, the return to us and the postage paid. And by doing something like this, then those people who choose to check it off and give us their email or their permission or their phone or whatever information we put on there, I doubt that we would do it, but let's say, for example, if we put on there, are you a seasonal resident or whatever, whatever we choose to be the 3 or 4 that we could fit on, then when those came back to us, we would have a little more information on each of the people, number one, but we would also, in a way, kind of have their permission to use these methods. Robocalls are different. Robocalls they have to sign up for, so they give us their permission when they sign up for those. Nobody gets it any other way. But certainly email and mail is pretty much complicit in owning a home that you can get information. But so that's the general idea, and I will just tie that in general. You'll see a list of a much softened liaison description. You should have 3 pieces of paper.
Wait, before we get to that.
Okay.
If we could. I just asked, should we, at this point, task Noreen with coming up with actually what this postcard would actually be, since you brought it to our attention. I
Right.
like the postcard idea myself. It's worked well for the water department. I think the personal contact is a good thing, so I would suggest that
Yeah, I will work on
we
that.
ask her to come up with what this is
Okay,
for
Okay,
the wastewater support committee.
okay.
all right. And I'll jump on that and go further because it won't change the weight of the envelope. We could even put in another small flyer, if we wanted to. Not a whole letter or whatever, but, sometimes it's an opportunity to get some instructions or another piece of information, into it. For instance, to get more room, this is my background on the card itself, you can have like a pink flyer that is, by a flyer, I don't mean a whole size, I mean the kind that are just, the smaller piece of paper, and you can have your instructions on there, saying, this is what we're doing, please check the appropriate boxes. So, just, taking advantage of the weight of the stamp, so to speak. So, I will take that on if,
We look forward to your proposal.
okay.
How's that?
Okay, I only have one comment on the questions. I like the one where you can say email or phone.
Where, yeah,
All right, the questions. The one where you ask if you need paper correspondence, I have a concern that I think there's going to be some people who are going to always want paper, to have the paper. I've had some
Yeah.
I've had some people ask about this, right? So what are you going to do if you've got enough people that are asking for paper? I guess what I'm saying is, I think for contact, I think it should either be email or phone.
these were just Dan's suggestions,
Yeah,
we'll all
I
have
just kind of
suggestions.
thought, I think
Yeah.
paper, we're going to get into an issue where somebody wants correspondence by paper all the time. Somebody's going to have to write it up, you're going to have to get it printed, you're going to have to get it sent out. I think it's going to be more of an issue than email or phone.
Well, I'll draft a bunch of things and we'll find out what the issues are.
I was just going to say, as a corollary of that, for better or for worse, there are some people who do not have the digital electronic, and it might actually be worth asking if they do not have email. Because I think there's such an assumption people can be reached that way. And I'm also quite worried about the phone situation, because I'm sure you're aware that some people actually turn off their phones if they're seasonal. They literally have the phone company disconnect their phone. So
Well,
I'm just gonna flag
then you
that.
would have to have them provide
An alternative.
alternative phone numbers.
Called
You know,
cell phone.
Or
Pardon me?
paper
Cell phone.
correspondence. That's
Yeah.
where that comes in, is some people, paper becomes the.
well, I personally think that paper is going to be an issue.
Well, maybe have a line that says, you know, special contact considerations or something. And
Yeah.
if the guy, if
Because
somebody writes
otherwise,
down,
you're
you
going to
know,
have people that just want to have a paper copy, and this is going to get cumbersome to say, oh, well, this person wants it, you got to go get it copied, you got to put it in an envelope.
Well,
Somebody
that
has
may
to
be
send it
something
out.
that Dan is the one who knows. He has a special list of people who have difficult issues. I mean,
And-
if there's somebody on the list who's blind and needs Braille. Well, you know, he's gonna have a special list like that. It's gonna be inevitable, just because of the human condition.
you know, maybe use a lead-in thing that says something like, we're trying to make communication with you the most effective and efficient that it can be.
Right.
That we think either email or phone is the best way. Help us. If you can't, then tell us something else.
Yeah,
I don't know.
something to
just
that
I'll
effect.
I'll draft something and
Yeah.
we'll.
Does anybody else have concerns about overusing reverse 9/11?
I don't even know what reverse 9/11
The
is.
robocall. It's a reverse.
Oh,
It's called
oh.
reverse 9/11, and that's when you get the messages
Yeah.
out. No concerns about it being overly used, where it becomes less effective and people
No.
tend to disregard it.
I do.
Having moved here from a place where it was constantly used, it was actually appreciated. You know, it's, oh, that's what that is. I
My
mean,
feeling is we're gonna use it, for instance, in this Phase 2 project to say, pick this street. On Friday or Thursday, you send out a robocall, that says, you know, starting Monday, on street blah, blah, please be aware that Fred
Okay.
Jones is gonna start digging up the road. I mean, we apologize for any inconvenience, you know, blah, blah.
Okay.
Just so people know. I mean, that's how I view it.
Okay, all right, so the other piece of this is a draft that Val and I put together with his ideas in mind, just gently framing what might be considered, do you have this? No? The neighborhood liaison for the future. So I would ask that the rest of the committee look this over and come back with some comments, additions, deletions, or whatever for our next meeting. Because of course, you know, who knows, it may even tie in with the contact card. And that will help form, you know, neighborhood areas, and you'll see in here that it's a much softened role.
I'm getting the sense that my first draft was a little too harsh.
It was when you said the strong communication skills. It was a little, it wasn't, I will say it wasn't super too harsh for me, but absorbing the tenor of the committee, I would say it was on the one end.
Considering this is a voluntary,
I tend to write matter of fact.
I think with it being voluntary,
Yeah.
and it's supposed to be a contact, nothing real formal.
Beforehand, I do hope that I captured your sentiment in here, although I will admit softening it.
And I'm going to raise an issue that was raised by both my discussion with Dan and Megan, and that is the definition of neighborhood. Both of them said, as they're defined here, probably way too big. And
Oh, yeah. That
so I'm
wasn't
just
meant to
want
be,
to
yeah.
underscore that
Right.
some people are going to look at this and say liaison, and then neighborhood will be the thing that they
Yeah,
raise.
yeah.
And Dan especially made that point. He said, how many people do you know in your neighborhood? How far does that definition
Yeah.
go?
Yeah.
Does it go 10 streets down, 20
I think that
streets
has
down?
to be a decision
But
of the
actually,
area and the
They
and the
weren't
people.
even marked neighborhoods, they were
Yes.
areas.
Yes.
Which an area was envisioned to encompass many neighborhoods, so, I think I just let that out of the, you know, that one went out before it should have. you know, but, no, it wasn't meant to be neighborhoods of that size.
But if I was
But it's
reading
good
this,
input.
and I'm a worthy and interested volunteer, I'd want to know the scope of my responsibilities. And I'm sure that that definition will also, you know, arise.
So in other words, so this will come back next meeting,
Okay,
and Val and I will hear your three opinions.
all right.
Could
All
I
right.
suggest, so in preparation for that meeting, that through the chair, you send out the latest or updated version of this beforehand, so that we all have it, so we can
Oh,
read it
okay,
ahead of
sure.
time and
All
say,
right.
oh, yeah, they, you know, they did this, they didn't do that, you know. Instead of trying to solve all the problems here, it might be better to have it ahead of time.
Yeah, so
All
I'm,
right, so that if, so in other words, what you're getting at is if we have any comments on this, send them to
no,
Noreen, so that we have it for when we come back?
What I'm saying is, I'm gonna give you my comments right now.
Yeah.
okay.
Anybody else, the next day, 2 days, 3 days, send the comments to whoever's gonna be over here. You then take those with your next version of this,
Okay,
but send it out through the chair to us before the meeting, so
Before
we
the-
come, not reading it that day, we come
Yeah.
prepared to say, oh, yeah, they thought about that, or, hey, how come you didn't include my, you know, we can
Yeah.
be more productive at our meeting, I
so
guess.
for open meeting rules, I'm gonna ask that the comments be sent to me.
Directly to you.
And then I will share them separately on email with Val.
Here's my open meeting comments right here, so you can pass those out.
And then
Very efficient.
after we've conferred before the next meeting, I'll send out an updated one.
Because I would like
Yeah.
to, at our next meeting, solidify it and say, okay, that's, you know, it's
Does that include the circling
Yep.
in of the
Yep.
zeros that I
my
noticed?
doodles. Those are my doodles.
His doodle, all right. All right, so then the next meeting will be Thursday, January 24th at 6 PM.
Okay.
Does that work for everyone?
Now, if I remember correctly, I'm just raising a topic. Is it my understanding now that town hall isn't open at night anymore, Mondays, for instance?
Not open, yeah.
So the regular hours are 8:30 to 4 or something? Huh?
Yeah, 8:30 to 4:30.
Okay.
So then we just need to get a key.
Yeah, we gotta get in the building.
And out.
Will you be here?
Yeah,
You will be, then I don't need to get the key.
I should be here,
All right.
All right,
If
so-
you're not,
I'll let you know.
let me know that I can come in and get one the day before.
What's the date?
January 24th.
January 24th, Thursday, January
Yeah.
24th,
At what time?
6.
Okay. Oh, okay. Oh, it's right in there. See, but I doodled over it, so it,
Yeah.
thank you.
Make those
Bye,
zeros.
Larry.
I like it.
Okay. I think we actually covered everything for a
Move to
change.
adjourn.
Second.
That's your usual motion.
You beat me to the punch. I second it.
All right, adjourn.
Non-debatable.
All in favor?
All in favor?
Non-debatable.
Bye.
Aye.
Thank you.